My dearest friends, allow me to introduce my wife. While the previous engagement was, regrettably, dissolved by necessity,
The Earl who mocked his ruined bride until she saved his estate and made him beg. Eliza Thornbridge did not cry when Lord Adrian Vale brought his new wife into the ballroom. That was what unsettled them most. Not the sister on his arm, pale and triumphant beneath a veil of Brussels lace. Not the priest's quiet confirmation that the marriage had taken place 3 mornings earlier in a private chapel. Not even the ring, Eliza's ring, the Thornbridge sapphire promised to her by contract, glittering now on Clara's finger as if betrayal could be polished into propriety. It was Eliza's silence. She stood at the center of 300 candles, with half of Hampshire watching her life collapse, and she did not give them the satisfaction of trembling. Adrian smiled with the careful pity of a man who had rehearsed his cruelty. "My dear Eliza," he said, loud enough for every fan to still, "you must understand. Clara is better suited to the life I require. A wife must be soft where you are severe, charming where you are useful. You were always excellent with accounts, but a ledger is not a heart." A few people laughed because rank had laughed first. Eliza looked past him to Clara, her younger sister, whose eyes did not hold triumph after all. They held fear. Then Eliza saw the folded paper half hidden in Adrian's glove, the same thick cream stock used by her late father's solicitor, a letter she had never received, a delay, a concealment, something larger than a stolen groom. In that moment, humiliation became evidence. Eliza curtsied, not low, not broken, only exact. "Then I wish you every happiness with the heart you purchased," she said. The room inhaled. Adrian's smile thinned. "Careful," he murmured. "A woman with no husband and no fortune should not spend her last coin on pride." Eliza finally looked at him. "No, Lord Vale," she said. "She should invest it." And before dawn, while society still feasted on her disgrace, Eliza Thornbridge left London with 1 trunk, 4 account books, and a letter opener sharp enough to break a seal. If you enjoy stories of women who are publicly shamed, quietly underestimated, and then return with power no one can take from them, stay with me. Because Eliza's ruin was not the end of her life. It was the first honest page of it. How it began. For 6 years, Eliza had been useful. Useful was the word people chose when they wanted to benefit from a woman's intelligence without admiring it. She was useful to her father after fever weakened his hands and the Thornbridge ledgers began to bleed red ink. Useful to Adrian Vale when his own estate accounts arrived tangled with debt and vanity. Useful to Clara, who borrowed ribbons, confidences, and at last a fiancé with the same breathless sweetness. Eliza was not born cold. As a girl, she had laughed too quickly and loved too loyally. She had believed promises because she had been raised among people who spoke of honor as if it were furniture, solid, inherited, impossible to move. Her father, Mr. Edmund Thornbridge, had been a gentleman of modest estate and immoderate trust. He taught Eliza columns before compliments, harvest cycles before harp music, and the stubborn dignity of making numbers tell the truth. "A dishonest man may embroider a sentence," he used to say, tapping a ledger with one ink-stained finger, "but he cannot charm arithmetic forever." When he died, Eliza was 21 and newly engaged to Adrian Vale, the handsome heir of Blackmere Park. Adrian had seemed attentive then. He praised her judgment, asked for her advice, even brought her estate papers with a humility that felt intimate. "I know nothing of drainage," he confessed one autumn afternoon, bending over a map beside her. "But I know enough to admire the woman who does." That was how he entered her life, not as a villain with a sneer, but as a man clever enough to make dependence look like devotion. Eliza reorganized his tenant arrears. She discovered an overpaid steward. She found 3 leases written so vaguely that Blackmere was losing grazing rights every Michaelmas. Adrian thanked her with gloved kisses and talk of partnership. Clara watched from doorways. Clara had always been loved differently. Their mother had died bringing her into the world, and guilt made indulgence easier than discipline. Clara learned early that tears opened doors, that helplessness summoned rescue, that softness could become a weapon if held with pretty hands. Still, Eliza loved her. She excused the small thefts of attention. She forgave the ruined gowns, the misplaced letters, the way Clara repeated Eliza's thoughts at dinner in a sweeter voice and received twice the praise. The first warning came after Mr. Thornbridge's funeral. The solicitor, Mr. Fenwick, mentioned a codicil to the will, some matter concerning Eliza's maternal aunt, Mrs. Honoria Wycliffe, and an old property called Briarwick Grange. Before he could explain, Adrian interrupted with a hand on Eliza's shoulder. "Not today," he said gently. "Miss Thornbridge has endured enough papers for 1 week. Send everything through me. I am family in all but name." Eliza, exhausted by grief, allowed it. That was the first signature she gave away without reading. The second was a power of correspondence during her mourning. Adrian said it would shield her from creditors, callers, and the coarse mechanics of inheritance. Clara agreed, weeping prettily into a handkerchief. "Let him help you, Liza. You always insist on bearing things alone." So Eliza let him help. Help became access. Access became concealment. For nearly a year, Adrian delayed their wedding with explanations so polished they reflected nothing. His uncle was ill. The settlements needed revision. Blackmere required repairs. Clara grew fragile and required country air. Eliza, still managing the remnants of her father's affairs, did not see the pattern because she believed herself loved. The truth arrived in public by design. Adrian did not merely choose Clara, he displayed the choice, where Eliza's collapse would become a performance and his narrative could harden before hers had breath. By midnight, London knew that severe Miss Thornbridge had been wisely set aside. By morning, 3 invitations were withdrawn. By noon, one paper hinted that Lord Vale had escaped an unsuitable connection with a woman more fitted to counting house than nursery. Eliza read that line in the posting inn at Andover and laughed once. Then she broke the seal on the stolen letter. It was from Mr. Fenwick, written 8 months earlier. Her Aunt Honoria had died and left Eliza Briarwick Grange outright, a neglected estate of 2,000 acres, burdened by repairs but rich in water meadow, woodland, and tenant skill. More importantly, the codicil included a private note from her father. He had suspected Adrian's debts. He had instructed Fenwick to place Briarwick beyond any husband's control until Eliza had lived there 1 full year and signed the final transfer in person. Adrian had hidden it, not to spare her grief, to wait her out. If he married Eliza first, he could not touch Briarwick without conditions. If he ruined her, frightened her, and married Clara for her easier dowry, he might later buy the distressed estate through intermediaries when Eliza, isolated and ashamed, was forced to sell. Her humiliation had been financial strategy. Eliza folded the letter with hands so steady they frightened her. "Very well," she whispered to the empty room. "Let us see what a counting house woman can build." Briarwick Grange. Briarwick Grange did not look like salvation when Eliza first saw it. The roof sagged over the east wing. Nettles filled the carriage sweep. One chimney leaned like a drunkard against the sky. The fields were beautiful but tired, their hedges broken, their ditches choked, their tenants weary from years of absentee neglect. Mrs. Pike, the housekeeper, met Eliza at the door with flour on her sleeve and suspicion in her eyes. "We were told you might sell," she said. "You were told by whom?" "Men who asked too many questions and gave no names." Eliza looked across the courtyard, where rainwater gathered in cracked stones. "Then we shall disappoint them." The first months were not triumphant. They were cold, muddy, and humiliating in quieter ways. Eliza learned that ambition was not a speech. It was rising before dawn to compare seed prices by candlelight. It was walking fields until her boots split. It was admitting ignorance to tenants who had expected another gentlewoman playing at benevolence. Old Mr. Barlow, the longest-standing tenant, tested her with bluntness. "Beggin' pardon, miss, but ladies from London don't know what a ditch costs." "No," Eliza replied, opening her notebook. "So tell me." That answer changed more than pride could have. She listened, not prettily, not theatrically, but with the full discipline of attention. She learned which acres flooded because a mill owner upstream had altered a sluice, which cottages bred fever because landlords found lime wash less impressive than drawing room paper, which widows paid rent late, not from idleness, but because the old steward had charged illegal fees for cart access. Then she began. She sold silver she did not need and kept tools. She dismissed the steward after finding duplicate entries in his hand. She repaired drainage before parlors. She established a tenant ledger that recorded not only arrears but causes: illness, failed crop, death, dishonest middlemen, broken equipment. "A debt without its story is a trap," she told Mrs. Pike. "I mean to know the story." By spring, Briarwick was still shabby, but its accounts breathed. Eliza created a seed cooperative so tenants could purchase in bulk. She converted a rotting stable into a grain store. She negotiated with a Quaker miller for fairer rates. She set aside one field for experimental rotation after reading every agricultural paper she could obtain. She made mistakes. Clover failed in the North Field because she trusted a pamphlet more than local soil. A repair contract cost twice its estimate because she had not specified timber grade. When a tenant's child fell ill after she delayed cottage repairs to save money, Eliza sat all night beside the bed and understood that efficiency without mercy was only another form of vanity. The child lived. Eliza changed the budget the next morning. Her competence became less brittle. Her grief became less performative, even to herself. She no longer worked to prove Adrian wrong every hour. Some days she forgot him entirely, until a letter arrived addressed to Miss Thornbridge, formerly of Better Prospects. Those letters were never signed. Then, in her second year at Briarwick, the Earl of Asheford came to ask for a loan he was too proud to name. The Earl of Asheford. Gideon Hartwell, Earl of Asheford, was not handsome in the fashionable way. He was too sun-browned for Mayfair, too blunt in the shoulders, too careless with his cravat. A scar cut pale through one eyebrow, earned in Portugal according to gossip, though no one agreed whether from battle, horse, or duel. His estate, Thornhollow, bordered Briarwick's western woods, and for generations the two properties had shared grazing, grudges, and a road nobody wished to repair. Eliza first saw him arguing with Mr. Barlow beside a collapsed bridge. "Your cart broke the last beam," Barlow accused. "My cart exposed a beam that should have been replaced under King George," Ashford replied. "Which King George?" "Exactly." Eliza stepped into the mud. "Gentlemen, if the bridge is finished insulting its own ancestry, perhaps we might discuss weight, cost, and responsibility." Ashford turned. His gaze did not perform the usual inventory: face, figure, marriageability, scandal. It went to the notebook in her hand. "Miss Thornbridge," he said, "I have heard of your ledgers. How unfortunate. They dislike gossip." A corner of his mouth moved. "Then I shall speak plainly. Thornhollow needs that bridge as much as Briarwick does. I can provide timber, but not ready cash. And I can provide cash, but not timber at a fair price. That sounds almost like cooperation. Let us not say anything radical in front of witnesses, my lord." Their first agreement was a bridge. Their second was a shared drainage survey. Their third, more dangerous, was honesty. Thornhollow was magnificent from a distance and rotting underneath. Ashford had inherited a title, a war debt, 3 mortgages, and tenants who loved him enough to conceal how badly they suffered. His late father had spent money like a man trying to outrun shame. Gideon had returned from the continent with discipline but no liquidity, honor but no system. "I can command men under fire," he told Eliza one evening in Briarwick's temporary estate office, rain ticking against the windows. "Yet I cannot make these numbers stop accusing me." Eliza looked through the accounts. He had not hidden the worst pages. That impressed her more than charm. "Numbers accuse only when someone has taught them the truth," she said. "Yours have been taught flattery." "Can flattery be retrained?" "Expensively." He laughed, then saw she was not joking. The partnership they formed scandalized 3 counties before it saved 1 estate. A gentleman and an unmarried woman drawing up agricultural reforms together was improper. A titled earl allowing that woman authority over lease restructuring was nearly indecent. Tenant-focused reforms were called sentimental, dangerous, French, Methodist, and several other things by men who had never repaired a barn with their own rent money. Eliza proposed what she had learned at Briarwick: transparent leases, cooperative purchasing, drainage funded by shared profit rather than punitive arrears, cottage repairs counted as investment instead of charity, and crop experiments tested on limited acreage before wider adoption. Ashford added what she lacked: political access, timber rights, military logistics, and the willingness to stand in rooms that would have shut their doors to her. But he did not speak for her when she could speak. At the first county agricultural meeting where Eliza presented figures, Sir Martin Cresswell chuckled into his waistcoat. "Are we to be lectured on husbandry by a lady who possesses no husband?" The room stirred with easy cruelty. Ashford's hand tightened on the back of his chair. Eliza answered before he could rise. "No, Sir Martin. You are to be lectured on arithmetic by a woman who possesses 3 profitable harvests. If your objection can produce better yields than mine, I shall sit down." No objection did. Gideon looked at her afterward with something warmer than admiration and steadier than desire. "You saved me the trouble of defending you," he said. "I did not require defense." "No, but I was prepared to enjoy it." She should have found that irritating. Instead, she found herself smiling in the carriage home. The sabotage. Adrian Vale did not notice Eliza's recovery until it began to cost him. Blackmere's tenants heard of Briarwick Seed Cooperative and asked why their own rents rose while their roofs failed. A miller left Adrian's contract for Eliza's fairer network. 2 investors who had expected Briarwick to sell quietly withdrew from a scheme Adrian had arranged through proxies. What angered Adrian most was not that Eliza had survived. It was that some buried, inconvenient part of him had once admired the very qualities now defeating him. There had been evenings, before greed became the louder appetite, when he had watched her bend over his accounts and felt something dangerously close to love. Not the generous kind. Adrian's love had always wanted to possess what impressed it. He had wanted Eliza's mind beside him, then beneath him, then safely inside his control. When her inheritance proved protected, admiration soured into resentment. He could forgive a beautiful woman for being dependent. He could not forgive a brilliant one for being free. Worse, Clara was unhappy. Marriage had not made her powerful. It had made her decorative in a house where creditors arrived more faithfully than friends. At first, Clara told herself she had won because Adrian still smiled at her in public. Then she heard him call her victory useful to a broker. She found a draft letter in which he described her as manageable. Once, when she begged him to leave Eliza alone, he closed the drawing room door and reminded her that a wife who confessed to helping conceal correspondence could be ruined more thoroughly than a jilted sister. Do not grow a conscience after enjoying the reward, he told her. After that, Clara's softness stopped feeling like shelter. It felt like a locked room. The first attack came through rumor. Anonymous notes reached assembly rooms and breakfast tables. Miss Thornbridge spent improper hours with the Earl of Asheford. Miss Thornbridge manipulated tenants for profit. Miss Thornbridge had always been too ambitious for feminine decency. Miss Thornbridge's father had died nearly insolvent because she meddled where men should rule. Eliza endured the old burn of public judgment, but this time it did not find her alone. Mrs. Pike brought her tea and said, "If wickedness is being good at sums, miss, may the Lord make us all villains." Mr. Barlow spat into the yard and offered to identify any gentleman by boot print. Ashford sent no dramatic declaration. He sent copies of every shared account, cleanly witnessed, with a note. Facts are dull weapons, but they do not rust. Eliza kept that note in her desk. The second attack was legal. Adrian produced an old agreement bearing Eliza's signature, claiming she had authorized him to negotiate future sale rights over Briarwick during her mourning. It was clever, not crude. The document was not an outright forgery. It was a real paper she had signed, attached to pages she had never seen. For one afternoon, Eliza felt 21 again, grieving, exhausted, trusting a man's gentle hand on her shoulder. Then she became angry with precision. She returned to every letter, every date, every receipt. She found the gap between Mr. Fenwick's codicil and Adrian's first inquiry to a land broker. She found a payment to the dismissed steward. She found Clara's handwriting on a copied inventory, shaky and guilty. Clara arrived at Briarwick 3 nights later, soaked from rain, with no maid and a bruise of sleeplessness beneath each eye. She had not come in one clean burst of courage. For weeks she had hidden small things badly. A copied date, a torn memorandum, the name of the broker whispered by a footman she had paid with earrings. Twice she had walked as far as the lane toward Briarwick and turned back because Adrian's threat still had teeth. The third time, after he instructed her to swear, Eliza had always been unstable. Clara understood that silence would not merely protect her. It would make her his instrument forever. "I did not know at first," Clara said, standing in the kitchen because she no longer had courage for parlors. "About the letter, about Papa's note. Adrian said you would waste the property out of pride and that he was protecting the family. I believed him because believing him made me chosen. Then I learned enough to stop believing him, and not enough, at first, to stop fearing him." Eliza's first instinct was not forgiveness. It was pain so old it felt ancestral. "You married him in my ring!" Clara began to cry, but for once she did not use the tears. "Yes." The honesty struck harder than excuses. Clara placed a packet on the table. "He keeps duplicates, letters, broker agreements, a memorandum about ruining your reputation before purchase. He says men forgive greed if it is dressed as concern." Eliza did not touch the packet at first. "Why bring this to me?" Clara looked smaller than her beauty. "Because I have been soft all my life, and softness did not save me. Perhaps truth will." Eliza took the packet. She did not embrace her sister, not then. Some wounds require more than one truthful night. But she sent Clara upstairs, ordered dry clothes, and locked the evidence in the iron box. The county hearing. Adrian expected a private settlement. Men like him trusted shame to do half their work. He assumed Eliza would pay to avoid scandal, that Ashford would distance himself to preserve political prospects, that Clara would remain too frightened to speak. Instead, Eliza requested a public hearing before the county magistrates regarding fraudulent attachment of estate rights and malicious interference with agricultural contracts. It was audacious. It was risky. It was exactly the sort of thing a ruined woman was not supposed to do, because public rooms were where ruin was manufactured. Eliza chose the battlefield anyway. The hearing took place in the assembly hall at Marchford, beneath portraits of dead men who had profited from appearing reasonable. Adrian arrived immaculate. Clara arrived veiled. Ashford arrived without flourish and stood not in front of Eliza, but beside the witnesses' bench, where she could see him if she wished and ignore him if she needed. Adrian performed beautifully at first. He spoke of concern, instability, and resentment with the careful sorrow of a man pretending reluctance. He even allowed his voice to soften when he mentioned their former engagement, as if betrayal had injured him too. Then Eliza opened the ledgers. First came the protected codicil, then Fenwick's concealed letter, then the broker's memorandum, then the payments to the steward, then the altered pages attached to her signature. Adrian did not collapse. He adjusted. "Miss Thornbridge is talented," he said. "Talented enough, perhaps, to arrange papers after the fact." Eliza had expected this. Mr. Fenwick confirmed the letter. The broker admitted negotiations through an unnamed intermediary. Neither was enough to finish him. Then Eliza called Clara. For the first time in her life, Clara crossed a room without trying to be admired. Her voice shook, but she did not stop. She described the hidden letters, the copied inventory, the threat Adrian had made if she confessed, and the sentence that had finally broken her obedience. Once Briarwick was bought cheaply, Clara would never again need to envy what her sister possessed. Adrian turned on her with a softness more frightening than rage. "My love," he said, "you are confused." Clara lifted her veil. "No," she answered. "I was confused when I mistook being chosen for being loved. I am clear now." The hall changed, not into justice, but into a room where cowardice had become inconvenient. Eliza rose only after the silence had settled. "This was never merely a broken engagement," she said. "It was an attempt to turn a woman's grief into a purchase price. Lord Vale did not only attack my name, he attacked contracts, tenants, wages, harvests, and every family whose roof depended on reforms he wished to discredit." She looked at Adrian then. "You called me useful as an insult, but useful things endure. Bridges, ledgers, seeds, and women who learn the cost of trusting charming men before becoming too expensive to buy." No one laughed this time. The life she chose. The magistrates could not repair every wound. Law seldom has that much imagination. But Adrian's claim over Briarwick was dismissed. His intermediary contracts were exposed. Creditors, smelling weakness, descended upon Blackmere. The Agricultural Society, which had mocked Eliza months before, requested a written paper on cooperative tenant investment. She sent one. It was devastatingly well footnoted. Briarwick and Thornhollow prospered over the next 3 years, not by miracle, but by system. Cottages improved, yields rose. Arrears fell because fewer families were crushed before harvest. Other estates copied the model while pretending not to. Eliza became influential in the way women often do before history admits it, through letters, committees, results, and men repeating her ideas in rooms where she had not yet been invited. Ashford noticed every theft of credit and found increasingly inventive ways to return her name to the sentence. Their affection did not arrive like a rescue. It arrived like weather after a hard season, gradual, undeniable, earned. He loved her mind first, or perhaps he respected it first, and love followed respect because it had finally found honest ground. She loved his restraint, his dry humor, the way he never confused support with command. When he disagreed with her, he did so directly. When she was wrong, he trusted her enough to say it. When she succeeded, he did not look surprised. One evening at Briarwick, after a meeting about a proposed agricultural college for tenant sons and daughters, Gideon found Eliza in the restored east wing. Sunlight lay over the room that had once smelled of damp and abandonment. "I have been advised," he said, "that if I intend to ask you to marry me, I should do it before half the county decides you are too formidable for any man and begins congratulating me on my escape." Eliza looked up from her papers. "And do you intend to ask?" "Yes, badly, I suspect. I have rejected 7 speeches for being either too military or too sentimental." A promising start. He came closer, not kneeling yet, because he knew better than to turn her life into theater without permission. "I do not want to own your work, Eliza. I do not want to soften you, display you, or be praised for tolerating your brilliance. I want to build beside you, argue with you, lose gracefully when your figures are better, stand with you when rooms become ugly. Come home to a house where neither of us must become smaller to be loved." Eliza's throat tightened. Once, she had believed love meant being chosen in public. Now she understood that the deeper vow was being recognized in private and respected in consequence. "That was not bad," she said. "No? A little sentimental." "Disaster." She smiled. "Ask me anyway." So he did. Eliza accepted not because she needed restoration, but because she had already restored herself. Marriage would not rescue her from ruin. It would join a life she had made with her own hands. Years later, when Briarwick's reforms were cited in Parliament by a man who pronounced her name incorrectly, Eliza laughed over breakfast and corrected the clipping in ink. Clara, living separately and quietly rebuilding a humbler life, wrote sometimes. Their sisterhood did not become simple, but it became truthful, which was better than pretty. Adrian Vale, reduced by debt and public distrust, attempted once to speak to Eliza after a lecture in London. "You have done well," he said, as if granting permission. "I suppose I underestimated you." Eliza considered him, the man who had once seemed capable of ending her world. How small he looked outside it. "No," she replied. "You estimated me by what you could take. That was your mistake." Then she stepped past him to where Gideon waited by the carriage, holding not her cloak like a servant, nor her arm like an owner, but the door like a man who knew she would choose for herself whether to enter. Eliza did. Not into safety, not into obedience, not into anyone's shadow. Into the life she had priced, planted, defended, and claimed. And if society remembered the night she was betrayed, it remembered something else more clearly. The morning she stopped being a cautionary tale and became a precedent.